I never thought my gas bill would be the thing that finally pushed me over the edge with the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. But here we were, standing in my front yard at 7 in the morning while Patricia Campbell waved a letter in my face like it was a search warrant. My name is Walter Richardson, and I have lived in this Cincinnati, Ohio suburb for exactly 3 years. 3 years of dealing with weekly notices about my mailbox being 2 inches too far to the left, my lawn being a 1/4 inch too tall, and my Christmas lights staying up 3 days past the approved date. But this morning was different. This morning, Patricia was demanding something so absurd that I actually laughed in her face. "Mr. Richardson, this is not a laughing matter," she said, her voice hitting that pitch that only middle-aged HOA presidents seem capable of reaching. "The greenhouse needs consistent heating, and your property line shares the utility easement. The board has voted, and you are required to provide supplemental heating through the winter months." I stopped laughing. "You want me to heat your greenhouse?" The HOA greenhouse that I did not vote for, did not want, and have nothing to do with. Patricia adjusted her glasses, which hung on one of those beaded chains around her neck. She was wearing a cream-colored pantsuit despite the freezing December morning, and her blonde hair was styled in that specific way that screamed soccer mom turned petty tyrant. "It is not my greenhouse, Mr. Richardson. It is the community greenhouse." And according to Section 47, Subsection 12 of the HOA bylaws, any structure that provides community value can requisition reasonable support from adjacent property owners. Reasonable support. You are talking about hundreds of dollars in heating costs every month. She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "The board estimates it will be no more than $200 per month. A small price to pay for the increased property values the greenhouse provides." I looked past her at the massive glass structure that had been erected 6 months ago on what used to be a nice little community park. The HOA had decided, without any real input from the homeowners, that Meadowbrook Estates needed a showcase greenhouse where they could grow exotic plants and flowers for neighborhood events. Never mind that most of us would have preferred they fix the broken streetlights or repave the cracked roads. "And if I refuse," Patricia's smile widened, "then you will face daily fines of $50 until compliance is achieved. The letter explains everything. You have until Friday to make arrangements with the heating contractor." She handed me the certified letter and walked back to her white Lexus SUV, which was parked deliberately blocking half of my driveway. I stood there in my bathrobe and slippers, watching her drive away while my breath formed clouds in the cold air. My hands shook as I opened the letter, though whether from cold or anger I could not tell. The letter was 3 pages long and written in that specific legal language designed to confuse and intimidate. But the basic message was clear. I had to install a gas line extension from my property to heat the greenhouse, and I had to pay for both the installation and the ongoing heating costs. The HOA would graciously reimburse me $50 per month as a goodwill gesture. My wife Sarah had left for work already, so I went inside and called her immediately. "They want us to do what?" she said, her voice escalating. "Heat their greenhouse." Apparently, when they were planning this monstrosity, they realized the nearest gas line was on our property, and it would cost them less to force us to extend our line than to run a new one from the street. That cannot be legal. I am going to find out. I spent the rest of that morning on the phone with lawyers. The first 3 told me they did not handle HOA disputes. The fourth, a guy named Marcus Chen, actually listened to my story and asked me to email him the letter and our HOA bylaws. "Call me back this afternoon," he said. "I need to review the documents." While I waited, I did what any reasonable person would do and went down the rabbit hole of HOA horror stories online. I learned that HOAs have far more power than most people realize, that they can place liens on your property for unpaid fines, and that fighting them often costs more than just complying. But I also learned that they are not all powerful, and that their bylaws have to comply with state and federal law. Marcus called me back at 3. Okay, so I have good news and bad news. The bad news is that the bylaw they are citing does technically exist. The good news is that it is almost certainly unenforceable. The language is so vague that no court would uphold it, especially for something this expensive and ongoing. However, fighting it will cost you probably $5,000 in legal fees, and there is no guarantee you will recover those costs even if you win. What do you suggest? Honestly, comply minimally, document everything, and look for a way to make it their problem instead of yours. HOAs like this count on people not fighting back. Sometimes the best revenge is malicious compliance. I thanked him and hung up, his words echoing in my head. Malicious compliance. I could work with that. That evening, Sarah and I sat at the kitchen table and went over our options. We could fight it in court and probably win, but go broke in the process. We could refuse and let the fines pile up until they put a lien on our house. Or we could get creative. What if we just do exactly what they asked? I said. Sarah looked at me like I had lost my mind. You want to give them what they want? No, I want to give them exactly what they asked for with no extras. They want me to extend a gas line to heat the greenhouse. Fine. But I control that line. It runs from my property using my gas account. Which means if there is ever a problem, a leak, a safety concern, anything at all, I have every right to shut it off. She started to smile. You are going to wait for them to screw up and then you are going to use it against them. I am going to install that line to the absolute minimum specification required by law. And then I am going to wait. The next morning, I called the number on the letter and spoke with the heating contractor Patricia had recommended. His name was Steve something, and he quoted me $4,000 for the installation plus the ongoing costs. That seems high, I said. Well, the HOA specified some pretty particular requirements. They want the line buried deep, commercial-grade materials and a separate meter so they can track usage. They want a separate meter, on my property, using my account. Yeah, I thought it was weird too, but that is what the work order says. I told him I would call him back and instead contacted a different contractor, one who was not already in Patricia's pocket. Jim's heating and gas came out that afternoon, and Jim himself walked the property with me. I can do this for $2,500, he said. But I got to tell you, this whole setup is weird. Why are you heating someone else's building? HOA insanity, I said. But here is what I need. I need it done to code, everything legal and safe. But I also need a shut-off valve on my side of the property line, easily accessible, and I need the whole system on my existing meter, not a separate one. Jim scratched his chin. That is actually easier and cheaper. The HOA is not going to like not having their own meter, though. The HOA did not say I had to install a separate meter. They just said I had to provide heating. Let them complain after it is already done. Jim grinned. I like your style. I will have my guys out here Monday. I called the HOA office and left a message that I would be in compliance by the end of the week, and that I had hired my own contractor, as was my legal right. Then I waited for the explosion. Patricia called me within an hour. Mr. Richardson, you were supposed to use the approved contractor. The letter said I had to provide heating. It did not say I had to use a specific contractor. I am using a licensed and insured professional, and the work will be up to code. The board will need to approve your contractor. The board can inspect the work after it is completed. If it is not up to code, I will fix it, but I am not paying $4,000 when I can get it done properly for $2,500. There was a long silence on the other end. The board will be discussing this at the emergency meeting tomorrow night. You should attend. She hung up before I could respond. The emergency board meeting was held at Patricia's house, which should have been the first red flag. HOA board meetings are supposed to be held at neutral locations, but Meadowbrook Estates had been doing them at Patricia's place for years, and nobody had bothered to challenge it. I arrived at 7 sharp and found about 15 other homeowners already there, most of whom I recognized but did not really know. We all nodded to each other with that specific solidarity of people trapped in the same bureaucratic nightmare. Patricia called the meeting to order from her position at the head of her dining room table. Sitting next to her were the other board members. Ron Davies, the vice president who never disagreed with Patricia about anything. Susan Martinez, the treasurer who mostly seemed confused about why she was there. And Gary Klein, the secretary who spent most meetings playing on his phone. We are here to discuss Mr. Richardson's refusal to follow proper procedures regarding the greenhouse heating installation, Patricia began. I am not refusing anything, I said. I am providing the heating as requested. I am just not using your overpriced contractor. Steve is a qualified professional who has worked with the HOA for years. Steve is qualified, but he quoted me nearly double what my contractor quoted. Unless the HOA wants to pay the difference, I am using Jim's heating and gas. Ron leaned forward. The concern is quality control. How do we know your contractor will do acceptable work? He is licensed, bonded, and insured. He has been in business in Cincinnati for 20 years. I will provide all his credentials if you want them. But the letter you sent me says I have to provide heating, and that is what I am doing. It does not say how or with whom. Patricia's face was turning red. You are being deliberately difficult. I am being cost-effective. If you want to dictate which contractors I use, then the HOA should pay for the work. Several other homeowners murmured agreement, which clearly annoyed Patricia even more. Fine, she said. But any deficiencies in the installation will result in fines and mandatory corrections at your expense. That is fine. I expect the same standard to apply to all HOA projects. If the greenhouse has any deficiencies, I assume the board will personally cover the costs of corrections. The meeting devolved from there, with Patricia trying to introduce several new bylaws that would have given the board even more power over contractor selection and home improvements. But enough homeowners pushed back that she eventually tabled the discussion for a future meeting. As we were leaving, an older guy named Frank pulled me aside. Good for you, standing up to her. She has been running roughshod over this neighborhood for 2 years. Why does everyone keep electing her then? Frank laughed bitterly. Most people do not vote, and the ones who do vote are her friends. She has maybe 30 people who show up to elections out of 200 homes. The rest of us just pay our dues and try to avoid her attention. That needs to change. Good luck with that. People have tried. Patricia has a way of making life miserable for anyone who opposes her. I was starting to see that. Jim's crew showed up Monday morning and started digging the trench for the gas line. It ran from my garage, where my gas meter was, across about 50 feet of my backyard, and then another 30 feet through the common area to the greenhouse. The whole job took 3 days, and Jim made sure everything was documented with photos and permits. You want to make sure the shutoff valve is obvious, he asked as we did the final walkthrough. Very obvious. I want it clearly labeled and accessible. He installed a bright yellow valve right at the property line with a laminated sign that said, "Emergency gas shutoff greenhouse line." It could not be more clear. Patricia came by on Thursday morning to inspect the work. She walked the entire line with Jim and me, taking notes on her clipboard. "Where is the separate meter?" she asked. "There is not one. The letter did not require a separate meter. Everything runs through my existing meter, and I will bill the HOA monthly based on usage." "How will we verify the charges?" "You will receive copies of my gas bill, and I will calculate the greenhouse usage based on the readings from the greenhouse thermostat. It is all documented and transparent." She did not like it, but she could not find anything technically wrong with the installation. The work was up to code, properly inspected and functional. She signed off on the inspection with obvious reluctance. "The HOA will expect the first bill in January," she said. "And I will expect the HOA to pay it within 30 days, or I will exercise my right to shut off the line for non-payment." Her eyes narrowed. "You would not dare. Try me. This is my gas, my property, and my line. You wanted me to provide heating, and I am doing it. But I am not running a charity." She left without another word, and I felt like I had won a small victory. Of course, I should have known that Patricia was not the type to accept defeat gracefully. The next 2 months were relatively quiet. The greenhouse stayed warm, growing whatever exotic plants Patricia had decided the neighborhood needed. I received my gas bill in January, calculated that the greenhouse was using about $300 worth of gas per month, and sent the HOA an itemized invoice for $250. I knocked off $50 as the goodwill gesture Patricia had mentioned, even though they had specified they would be paying me the $50, not the other way around. Whatever, I was trying to be reasonable. The HOA did not pay. February came and went. My second invoice went unpaid. I sent a certified letter in March explaining that if payment was not received within 14 days, I would shut off the gas line until the account was current. The letter was returned to me with "refused" stamped on it. That was when I knew Patricia was trying to set me up. She wanted me to shut off the gas so she could fine me for not providing heating as required. It was a trap, and I almost walked right into it. Instead, I called Marcus Chen again. "What happens if they do not pay me and I shut off the line?" I asked. "Legally, you are within your rights. It is your property and your utility account. However, the HOA will likely argue that you are in violation of their order to provide heating. It could get messy. What if I gave them plenty of warning? Multiple invoices, certified letters, all documented. That helps. You want to make it clear that you are willing to provide the service, but that you cannot be expected to do it for free. If they are refusing to pay, that is on them." One more question. What if something else happened that required me to shut off the gas? Something safety-related? Marcus was quiet for a moment. "If there is a legitimate safety concern, you have not just the right but the obligation to shut off the gas immediately." "Are you saying there is a safety concern?" "Not yet. But that greenhouse gets used for HOA events, lots of people coming and going. Who knows what could happen? Just be careful. If you manufacture a safety concern, that could blow back on you." I thanked him and started watching the greenhouse very carefully. As it turned out, I did not have to wait long or manufacture anything. Patricia's own arrogance created the opportunity I needed. In late March, the HOA announced they were hosting a big spring fundraiser in the greenhouse. It was going to be a fancy dinner event with catering, alcohol, and tickets sold at $100 each. All proceeds would go toward more neighborhood beautification projects, which I was sure meant more ugly statues and unnecessary landscaping. Sarah and I did not buy tickets. The event was scheduled for April 5th. a Saturday evening. But on Thursday, April 3rd, I came home from work to find that someone had dug up part of my backyard without permission. There was a small excavator parked on the common area, and 2 workers were trenching near the gas line. I walked over immediately. "What is going on here?" One of the workers, a young guy in a safety vest, looked up. "HOA hired us to install some landscape lighting for the event. We are running electrical lines. Did anyone happen to mention that there is a gas line right there?" He paled. "No, they just told us to dig here." I pulled out my phone and showed him the pictures from when Jim had installed the line, including the marked locations. The electrical trench they had dug came within inches of the gas line in 2 places. "We got to stop," the worker said to his partner. "This is not safe. If we hit that gas line, we could kill somebody." They shut down immediately and called their supervisor. I called Jim. Jim came out within the hour and did an inspection. "You got lucky," he said. "They did not hit the line, but this is way too close, and they did not call 811 before they dug." "That is illegal. Can you document this?" "Already taking pictures. You want me to report them?" "Not yet. Let me handle this first." I went straight to Patricia's house and rang the doorbell. She opened it with that same fake smile. "Mr. Richardson, what can I do for you?" "You can explain why you had workers digging within inches of a pressurized gas line without calling for utility location first." The smile disappeared. "I have no idea what you are talking about." "The landscape lighting for your event. Your contractor nearly hit the gas line that is feeding your greenhouse. If they had ruptured it, we could have had an explosion." "That is not my problem. The contractor is responsible for knowing where utilities are." "Actually, it is your problem. You hired them. And when I report this to the utility company and the city, they are going to want to know why you did not follow the law and call 811. She crossed her arms. "Are you threatening me?" "I am informing you that I am shutting off the gas to the greenhouse effective immediately due to safety concerns. The line needs to be inspected to make sure it was not damaged, and the area needs to be properly marked before any more work is done. Once the situation is resolved, I will turn it back on." "You cannot do that. We have an event in 2 days. "I can and I am. This is a safety issue. If you have a problem with it, talk to your contractor about why they did not follow proper procedure." I walked back to my property, went to the bright yellow shut-off valve, and turned off the gas. The greenhouse would stay warm for a while from residual heat, but by tomorrow it would start getting cold. And by Saturday, when their fancy event was supposed to happen, it would be freezing. Patricia called me 6 times that night. I did not answer. She left increasingly frantic voicemails threatening fines, legal action, and everything short of physical violence. I saved every one of them. Friday morning, I had Jim come back out and do a formal inspection of the gas line. He brought ground-penetrating radar equipment and checked every foot of the line. "No damage," he said. "But this really could have been bad. Want me to write up a report, please? Make it detailed." I took Jim's report and filed a complaint with the Ohio Utilities Protection Service about the unauthorized digging. I also sent a copy to the city building department and to my insurance company. Everything documented, everything by the book. Then I sent an email to the entire HOA board, not just Patricia. I explained the situation, attached Jim's report and photos, and stated that the gas would remain off until the HOA provided proof that all future work would comply with utility notification laws, and that the landscape contractor had been properly informed about the gas line location. Patricia sent back a one-line response. "Turn the gas back on or face daily fines," I replied. "No." Saturday morning, I woke up to find my front yard full of signs. Someone, almost certainly Patricia or one of her friends, had put up dozens of small signs that said things like "Neighborhood bully lives here" and "This homeowner ruins community events." I took pictures of everything and left the signs up. Let people see how unhinged Patricia was. The fundraiser that evening was apparently a disaster. The greenhouse was 40 degrees by the time guests arrived. People showed up in their fancy clothes expecting a warm, elegant dinner, and instead found themselves shivering among Patricia's exotic plants, many of which were already starting to wilt from the cold. Several people left immediately and demanded refunds. The catering company could not keep the food warm. The whole thing fell apart, and according to Frank, who had bought a ticket just to see what happened, Patricia spent most of the evening furiously texting on her phone while trying to maintain her smile. Sunday morning, I found my mailbox knocked over and my car keyed. The word "bully" was scratched deep into the driver's side door. That was when I called the police. The officer who came out was sympathetic but not particularly hopeful. Without witnesses or video, there is not much we can do. Do you have security cameras? Not yet, but I will buy tomorrow. Good idea. Document everything. If this is HOA related, you might need it for court. I filed a police report anyway, just to have it on record. Monday, I had security cameras installed covering my entire property. Tuesday, I got a letter from a law firm representing the HOA demanding that I restore gas service immediately and pay for all damages related to the failed fundraiser, totaling $12,000. I forwarded the letter to Marcus. "They do not have a case," he said. "You shut off the gas for legitimate safety reasons and you documented everything. Let me draft a response." Marcus's response was a thing of beauty. It detailed every failure on the HOA's part: the unpaid invoices, the illegal digging, the failure to call 811, the harassment, and the vandalism. It ended with a demand that the HOA pay the outstanding gas bills immediately, and that they cease all harassment or face a lawsuit for damages. That letter apparently caused some upheaval within the HOA board. According to Frank, who was friends with Susan Martinez, the treasurer, Susan and Gary had not known most of what Patricia had been doing. They thought the gas bills were being paid. They had not authorized the landscape work that nearly hit the gas line. And they certainly had not approved threatening letters from lawyers. An emergency board meeting was called for the following week. This time, it was held at the community clubhouse, and this time nearly 100 homeowners showed up. I walked in to find the room packed and angry. People were not just mad at me. They were mad at Patricia and the entire situation. Patricia tried to call the meeting to order, but people started shouting questions before she could get through the opening formalities. Why were not the gas bills paid? Who authorized spending HOA money on a lawyer? Why did not anyone tell us we could have been responsible for a gas explosion? Patricia tried to maintain control, but she was losing the room. Finally, Gary stood up. "I did not know about most of this," he said. "Patricia has been handling day-to-day operations without consulting the full board. I did not know the gas bills were not paid. I did not know about the digging near the gas line. And I definitely did not authorize spending $3,000 on a lawyer to threaten Walter Richardson." Susan stood up next. "I did not authorize that payment either." "Patricia, where did that money come from?" Patricia's face was bright red now. "I have the authority as president to make operational decisions, not financial decisions without board approval," Susan said. "I need to see the accounts. Now." The meeting devolved into chaos. Ron tried to defend Patricia, but even he seemed shaken when the full scope of her unauthorized actions came out. Someone made a motion for a vote of no confidence in Patricia's leadership. Someone else seconded it. The vote was not even close. Patricia was removed as HOA president by a count of 73-4. She stood up, grabbed her purse, and walked out without a word. Ron followed her. Gary was appointed interim president, and his first act was to address me directly. "Mr. Richardson, on behalf of the board, I apologize. This should never have happened. We will pay the outstanding gas bills immediately, and we will make sure all future work complies with proper safety protocols. Can we meet tomorrow to discuss turning the gas back on?" "I appreciate that, Gary. Yes, let's meet tomorrow." The room actually applauded. Over the next week. Things slowly returned to normal. The HOA paid me the outstanding $750 for gas, plus an additional $500 as compensation for my trouble. Gary personally apologized again and assured me that the board was going to review all of Patricia's decisions and make sure nothing like this happened again. I turned the gas back on, but I also had Jim install a proper meter on the greenhouse side so that future bills would be clearer. The HOA paid for it without complaint. The plants in the greenhouse mostly died. A few hardy ones survived, but Patricia's exotic collection was almost completely wiped out. The board decided not to replace them, and instead turned the greenhouse into a more practical community space with regular plants and vegetables that neighborhood kids could help grow. It actually became something useful for once. As for Patricia, she tried to rally support for a recall campaign against Gary, but nobody would sign her petitions. She continued to live in the neighborhood but stopped coming to HOA meetings. Ron resigned from the board entirely and moved away that summer. The keying of my car remained unsolved, but after I installed the security cameras, there were no more incidents of vandalism. My insurance covered most of the repair cost. In July, something interesting happened. Frank came over with a copy of the HOA financial statements that Susan had finally completed a full audit of. "You need to see this," he said. The statements showed that Patricia had been using HOA funds for personal expenses for over a year. Nothing huge, but lots of small things. Dinners charged as board meetings, her cell phone bill as HOA communication expenses, even her car payment justified as transportation for HOA business. In total, she had misappropriated about $15,000. "Susan has filed a report with the police," Frank said. "They are investigating. Finally, some real consequences. There is more. The lawyer she hired. He is her brother-in-law. She paid him $3,000 to send one threatening letter. The board thinks that was just a way to funnel more HOA money to her family." I was not surprised, just disappointed that someone would be so blatant about it. The police investigation moved slowly, as these things do. But by September, Patricia was charged with theft and misappropriation of funds. It was not a huge case, but it was enough to make the local news. HOA president charged with stealing from neighborhood made for a good headline. Patricia pleaded guilty in November as part of a deal. She had to pay back the $15,000, plus fines and court costs. She got 3 years of probation and 100 hours of community service. Not jail time, but enough to thoroughly humiliate her and ruin her reputation. The best part was that part of her plea agreement was that she could not serve on any HOA board for 10 years. She was essentially banned from the thing she had used to wield power over everyone. By December, almost exactly a year after Patricia had first shown up in my front yard, demanding I heat her greenhouse, Meadowbrook Estates had a new HOA board that actually functioned properly. They held open meetings, communicated clearly, and made decisions based on what was actually good for the neighborhood rather than what fed someone's ego. The greenhouse became a genuine community asset. Local schools brought kids on field trips to learn about gardening. Elderly residents volunteered to maintain it. It was what it should have been from the start. As for me and Sarah, we finally felt like we actually lived in a neighborhood instead of under a dictatorship. We got to know our neighbors better. We attended HOA meetings and actually voted on things. And I never received another absurd demand to pay for something that should have been a shared expense. The gas line was still there, still running from my property to the greenhouse. But now, the HOA paid their bills on time, and I had no reason to shut it off. It became just another utility, boring and functional, which is exactly what it should have been. Sometimes I walk past the greenhouse in the evening and see families inside. Kids learning to plant seeds while their parents chat with neighbors. It makes me think about how close we came to disaster over Patricia's pride and stubbornness. How a little power in the wrong hands can corrupt even something as mundane as a neighborhood association. But mostly it reminds me that standing up to bullies, even when it is hard and expensive and frustrating, is worth it. Patricia counted on people being too tired or too scared to fight back. She made the mistake of pushing someone who was just angry enough and stubborn enough to push back harder. The funny thing is, I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to live in my house, pay my reasonable dues, and be left alone. But sometimes life does not give you that option. Sometimes you have to fight, not because you want to, but because the alternative is living under someone's thumb forever. Looking back now, I can see all the points where I could have made different choices. I could have just paid the bills and stayed quiet. I could have moved to a different neighborhood. I could have let Patricia win because fighting was too hard, but I did not, and I am glad. The gas line is still there, still heating the greenhouse through the cold Cincinnati winters. But it is no longer a symbol of someone's power over me. It is just a pipe, carrying gas, doing its job, and that is exactly what it should be. Sometimes Frank jokes that I should run for HOA president, but I always decline. I have seen what that job does to people, how it can turn reasonable humans into petty tyrants. I am happy to vote, happy to attend meetings, happy to contribute. But I will never want that much power over my neighbors' lives. The last I heard, Patricia and her husband were trying to sell their house and move to a different part of Cincinnati. The scandal made it hard for them to stay in Meadowbrook Estates. People were civil, but nobody forgot what she had done. That kind of betrayal of trust does not fade quickly. Ron apparently moved to Columbus and has nothing to do with HOAs anymore. I cannot blame him. Being Patricia's enabler probably seemed harmless at the time, but it cost him his reputation and his home. Gary is doing a good job as president. He is boring, which is exactly what an HOA president should be. He makes sure the roads get fixed, the common areas get maintained, and the rules are enforced fairly and consistently. Nobody is getting angry letters about their mailbox being 2 inches out of place. It is amazing how smoothly things run when the person in charge actually cares about the community instead of their own power. Susan stayed on as treasurer and implemented new financial controls, so nobody could ever misuse HOA funds again. Every expense over $100 requires board approval, and the financial statements are published quarterly for all homeowners to review. Transparency turns out to be a pretty good deterrent to corruption. The neighborhood actually feels like a community now. We have block parties that are not mandatory HOA fundraisers. We have a Facebook group where people help each other out instead of reporting violations. We have turned into what subdivisions are supposed to be, A collection of neighbors who generally like each other and work together to keep things nice. My gas bill is still higher than it was before the greenhouse, but the HOA pays their share on time every month, so it balances out. I keep detailed records anyway, just in case, but I have not needed them. The new board is scrupulously fair about expenses. The security cameras I installed caught some interesting things over the months. A family of raccoons that lives in the storm drain. The teenage kid from 2 streets over who was stealing packages, until I gave the footage to the police. Normal suburban stuff. Nothing related to HOA drama. Sarah and I are planning to stay in this house for the long term now. For a while, we seriously considered moving just to escape the HOA nonsense. But we like our house, we like our neighbors, and now that Patricia is gone, we like the neighborhood itself. It feels like ours again instead of hers. I learned a lot through this whole ordeal. I learned that HOA bylaws are often more bark than bite, and that standing up to unreasonable demands is possible even when it feels impossible. I learned that documentation is everything, and that having a good lawyer on call is worth the money. I learned that most people are reasonable if you give them the chance, and that the unreasonable ones usually dig their own graves eventually. Most importantly, I learned that communities are only as good as the people running them, and that it is worth fighting to put good people in charge. The greenhouse still stands, its glass panels catching the sun on cold winter mornings. I can see it from my kitchen window while I am making coffee. Sometimes, I think about that first morning when Patricia showed up demanding I heat it, and I marvel at how much has changed in 1 year. The plants inside are different now. Instead of exotic flowers that cost hundreds of dollars each, there are tomatoes and peppers and herbs. There is a section where kids plant sunflowers that grow taller than they are. There is a corner with native plants that attract butterflies and bees. It is practical and beautiful and actually serves the community instead of just being a status symbol. Someone suggested naming the greenhouse the Community Growth Center, which I thought was appropriately boring and functional. The name stuck. There is a little wooden sign out front now, made by one of the neighbors who does woodworking as a hobby. No plaques with Patricia's name on them, no dedication to the board. Just a simple sign welcoming everyone. I do not spend much time in the greenhouse myself. I am not much of a gardener, and I have spent enough of my life thinking about that building. But Sarah has started volunteering there on weekends, helping teach kids about growing vegetables. She finds it peaceful, she says. A way to make something good come out of all the conflict. That is probably the right attitude. You cannot change the past, cannot undo all the frustration and anger and stress. But you can make sure that something good comes from it eventually. My lawyer Marcus became a friend through all this. We get together for beers occasionally, and he tells me stories about other HOA cases. Apparently, my situation was not even that unusual. HOAs overstepping their authority is a common problem, and most people just comply because fighting seems too hard. Marcus says he wishes more people would stand up like I did, but he understands why they do not. It is expensive, stressful, and time-consuming. Not everyone has the resources or the stubbornness to see it through. I tell him I just got lucky that Patricia made so many mistakes. If she had been smarter about her corruption, if she had paid the gas bills and followed proper procedures, I might never have had a legitimate reason to shut off that line. The whole thing could have gone very differently. But that is the thing about people like Patricia. They get away with small things for so long that they start thinking they are untouchable. They get sloppy. They push too far, and eventually they push someone who pushes back harder. The vandalism on my car was never officially solved, but I have my suspicions. About a month after Patricia was charged, Ron's wife made an offhand comment at a neighborhood gathering about how it was a shame my car got damaged. Except, I had never mentioned the vandalism to her, and she had not been at any of the meetings where it came up. She just knew about it, which suggested she had heard about it from someone involved. I did not pursue it. At that point, everything was settling down and dredging up more conflict did not seem worth it. The car was fixed, the insurance had paid, and Ron was already moving away. Sometimes you have to let things go. Sarah says I am mellower now than I was a year ago, which seems ironic given everything that happened. But I think she is right. Having gone through all that conflict and come out the other side, normal life problems seem less stressful. Traffic is just traffic. Work annoyances are just work. Nothing feels as overwhelming as it might have before because I know I can handle worse. There is something empowering about fighting City Hall, or in this case the HOA equivalent, and winning. Not because you are rich or connected, but because you were right and you refuse to back down. It reminds you that systems of power are not as solid as they seem, and that ordinary people can make a difference when they decide to try. The other homeowners treat me a bit differently now, too. People wave when I drive by. Neighbors I never talked to before will stop and chat about the weather or ask for recommendations on contractors. There is a respect there that was not before. Or maybe it was always there, and I just did not notice because I was keeping my head down. Frank still jokes that I should run for the board, but with less humor now. He actually means it, but I still have no interest. I proved my point and won my fight. That is enough for me. I want to go back to being a regular homeowner, not a community leader or an activist. Some people are built for that ongoing battle, but I am not one of them. The greenhouse costs the HOA about $4,000 a year to heat, which breaks down to $20 per household annually. When you put it that way, it does not seem like much, but it was never really about the money. It was about someone trying to force that cost onto a single homeowner for no reason other than convenience and power. It was about Patricia deciding she could make me do what she wanted without consequences. She was wrong. I drive past her house sometimes and see the for sale sign still standing in the front yard. The housing market slowed down, and her place has been on the market for 3 months without any bites. That might be bad luck, or it might be that people in the neighborhood are quietly warning potential buyers about the previous owner. Either way, I do not feel bad for her. She made her choices, and now she has to live with the consequences. The community is planning a winter festival in the greenhouse next month, featuring hot chocolate and cookies and crafts for kids. Sarah and I already bought tickets. It will be strange being in that building for a social event, seeing it as something positive rather than a symbol of conflict. But that is growth, I suppose. Moving forward instead of staying stuck in anger. One thing I made sure of after everything settled down was that the bylaws got reviewed and updated. A group of homeowners, including me, worked with a lawyer to rewrite the most problematic sections. We added clear limits on board authority, requirements for financial transparency, and protections for homeowners who are asked to provide services or bear unusual expenses. The new bylaws specifically state that the HOA cannot require individual homeowners to provide utilities or services to common areas without fair compensation, and without board approval by a 2/3 vote. It will not prevent every future conflict, but it should prevent another Patricia from doing what she did. Those changes passed with overwhelming support. Turns out when you let all the homeowners vote on rules instead of having a small board decide everything, you get much more reasonable results. I found out recently that Patricia is suing the HOA for wrongful termination as president. Her lawyer is arguing that the vote removing her was not properly conducted and that she deserves reinstatement plus damages. It is almost certainly a doomed effort, but it tells you everything about her mindset. Even after being convicted of misappropriating funds, even after being exposed and humiliated, she still thinks she was right and everyone else was wrong. The HOA's lawyer says the lawsuit has no merit and will likely be dismissed quickly. But it is still costing the community money to defend, which means Patricia is still causing problems even from outside the board. Some people never learn. Next month marks 1 year since I shut off that gas line and let the plants freeze. It feels like it happened both yesterday and a lifetime ago. The immediate anger has faded, replaced by a kind of bemused satisfaction. I stood up to a bully. I followed the rules. I documented everything, and I won. It should not feel like such an accomplishment, but in a world where HOAs have so much power and homeowners have so few protections, it kind of is. Would I do it again? Absolutely. Would I recommend others do the same? That depends. If you have the resources to fight, if you can document everything, if you can stay calm and follow procedures, then yes. Stand up for yourself. But if fighting would genuinely hurt you financially or emotionally, then sometimes compliance is the smarter choice. Not every hill is worth dying on, and not everyone is in a position to wage that kind of war. I was lucky in a lot of ways. Lucky that Patricia made so many mistakes. Lucky that I could afford a lawyer's advice. Lucky that other homeowners were ready to support change. Lucky that the board members besides Patricia were actually reasonable people who had just been manipulated. Take away any of those factors and this story could have ended very differently, but it did not, and I am grateful for that. The greenhouse stands as a monument to what happens when someone tries to use rules as weapons and fails. It is a reminder that communities work best when everyone contributes fairly and when power is balanced. It is proof that standing up to unreasonable demands is possible, even when it seems impossible. And every time I see that yellow shutoff valve at the edge of my property, I smile a little. That valve represents my agency, my right to say no when something is not fair. It is a small thing, a bright yellow piece of metal on a gas pipe, but it changed everything. The line is open now, gas flowing freely to heat the greenhouse through another winter. The pressure is steady, the system is working, and everything is exactly as it should be. Boring, functional, fair. Sometimes boring is exactly what you need.